Chapter 15, World Shard. Just at that moment, flashbacks from 6 years ago flashed through the wolf's mind, and he remembered the basement of Bolmer's executive suite. He stood in front of a door then, too, closed his eyes, and said aloud, "Per aspera ad astra. Per aspera ad astra." The young male shouted tensely, and to everyone's amazement, green light lit up, whereupon the metal plate split in two and, like a sliding door, opened an entrance. Quickly Amarok unlocked his gun and entered the room. He held the rifle in his hands and saw humans, foxes and wolves sitting around a round table, now startled and turned to him. "What's going on here? What is this?" shouted a Gajan, who had been described on the news as the President of the United States. His shocked questioning was immediately accompanied by sounds that weapons made when the safety was off, and only a moment later the intruder found himself surrounded by barrels of numerous guns. His heart pounded, his knees trembled and he felt dazed, holding his rifle tautly and doggedly. His gaze moved back and forth frantically. He took his eyes off no one and breathed quiveringly. Chenerah, who had also jumped up, asked in horror with a loud shout, "What is this performance?" "My queen," the surrounded one began, snorting, "I am Amarok. I'm sure you remember. I have come to speak with you." The male had thought that the leaders would be guarded, but he had not foreseen that there were about 20 soldiers. The situation did not look good for him and he tried hard not to lose his nerve and let go of his gun in this hopeless situation. He had his finger on the trigger, ready to fire, even if it was to be just one and at the same time the last shot. Those present all stared at the Wolf Queen as if expecting an explanation. After all, this could have been a plot of the wolves, which had been forged in their knowledge. "Amarok?" she asked. "What are you doing here? What's all the ruckus about? How did you get in here?" Before the male could answer, the other conferees started discussing loudly, which made him even more tense. After what felt like an eternity to Amarok, someone suddenly shouted shrilly, "Now shut up all of you and sit back down." Hesitantly following the request, things quieted down when Amarok realized it was Chenerah who had been yelling around. "Hello Gajaze," the male wolf spoke calmly. "I'm glad you're here, too. I have to talk to you, too." Chenerah, who had also sat down, seemed to be seething inside and spoke in a firm voice, "Lower your weapon, Amarok." "Now, I'm afraid I can't do that under the circumstances, Your Majesty," the latter only explained, continuing to fix his gaze on the fully hooded soldiers surrounding him. "Tell your people to do it first. Only then will I comply with your request. I am sure you will understand." One of the soldiers looked to her as she nodded, complying with her subject's request. The officers then slowly lowered their firearms and cleared the way, still piercing the attacker with their gazes. They secured the weapons and kept their fingers on the lever. "And now yours," the queen called, but Amarok was afraid and did not move. His muscles were cramped and aching. Only very slowly his breathing returned to normal and still his heart was beating fast. He couldn't and wouldn't give in and was afraid they would shoot him anyway if he was no longer able to defend himself. Further incensed by this, his mistress added, "That's an order." And Chenerah added, "Do as she says, Amarok. Please. No harm will come to you. You have the word of all of us." Aware of the hopelessness, the young male relaxed his muscles and handed his rifle to a uniformed man, who quickly snatched it from him. "They should leave," he said, which Chenerah, visibly relieved, confirmed. The protectors of the round bowed slightly as they left the room together without saying a word or questioning Her Majesty's command. The inner tension of the wolf was released. The heart became calm. The breath slowed. Liberated. "Thank you, Your Majesty," he spoke and made a long bow, after which he looked into many relieved faces. "I hacked the transportation system with my infocom. At least the tubes between the pantry and the forecourt outside." Impressed, the shepherd dog looked in his direction and smiled silently. Because the wolf had done it, he stood before the leaders and governors of the warring races and had made himself heard. Now it was a matter of keeping a cool head and finding the right words so that they would all realize that the fight had to stop. "Pull up a chair and take a seat," the she-wolf offered, and the younger one followed. He looked around the room. There were barred windows with bright yellow curtains piercing the snow-white walls of the otherwise sober and cold-looking place. The massive, oval realwood table was surrounded by numerous seats where ladies and gentlemen sat whom the wolf had never seen before. I only want to talk to you, the supreme leaders. The others only talk to me and babble to you. I would like to avoid that, the Samo demanded. If you want, you can talk to them after my debate. As soon as I am through with this and can leave again, I don't care. Now, however, there are too many ears and mouths here for me. This is outrageous. Someone shouted, but President Johnson raised his hand and agreed, very well, quite as you wish, Amarok. Everyone, except the Wolf Queen, the Kesar, Mr. Carteron, and myself, please leave the room and take a seat in the next room. Immediately, the Met ones got up and left the room, quietly discussing. Amarok looked at expectant faces, while Adama Carteron seemed annoyed and crossed his arms. Get started, nodded the monarch. Now, the male wolf began his explanation. Let me make something clear to you. I have taken the risk of intruding and, in return for my courage, I expect you to listen with an open mind. Even if my way of speaking may not be as polite and labeled as yours. Adamak interrupted him briskly, well, that could be something. An uneducated wolf wants to guide the fate of the world. I'm only going to say this once, just shut your mouth and let him talk, fox. Hissed Chenerah, baring his teeth. Thank you, the wolf spoke to those now silent. It's a sunny day and a lot of people, wolves and foxes, have gathered out there to protest the state of their nations and all that's going on. Instead of going for a swim or a picnic, they're venting their anger that things really suck for everyone right now. Did you notice what their placards and banners say? They want an immediate end to the war. And they also want people to leave Alpha Vol again. The president and representative of the Gajans interjected, wait a minute, young wolf. It is not that simple. You must have noticed that we are helping the Samoyedans in this fight. We can't just leave again. I'm sure you don't realize it, but we've made treaties and we have to fulfill the obligations that arise from them. Of course you humans have. Crystal clear. But isn't it rather the rights that are contained there that interest you? Amarok teased. What exactly do you mean? Well, resource extraction and the right to freedom of movement, to name just two examples. Admittedly, we expect certain advantages for our help. Yes, but, the human pressed around, which his counterpart, however, quickly knew to interrupt. Besides, anthros blinded by your TVs and cars are excellent customers for you, who are persuaded that they need all this shit. More and more of it. One desire leads to another and you take perfect advantage of people's newly created need for recognition. Be honest, you earn vast sums here on our planet, don't you? So much money in so few years, great, isn't it? This is an outrage. The human exclaimed, pounding the table with a flat hand. That I have to listen to this is outrageous. Surely the Samoyedans are grateful for your help. But, honestly, enough is enough. The male admonished, turning to everyone with his next sentence, you do see that the Anthros want these aliens to get the hell out of here, or are you still asleep? The word aliens displeased the US president even more than the generally unseemly behavior and the loud mouth of the male. His head was red with anger, but that meant there had to be some truth in the wolfish words. Now Amarok turned directly to Serena, to you, my queen, I want to say that it has always been my honor to serve you. I once pledged my life to you and I do so again because I think you are worthy and because I believe in your judgment. I just know that you will decide rightly and wisely when it comes to doing what is best for your people. Thank you, faithful Amarok, she smiled and bowed her head respectfully. He continued, Your Majesty has won the war after all, the Aramarans hardly put up any resistance, they are as good as beaten. They cannot make amends for what they have done to our fellow wolves, I know. But for the sake of peace, forgive them and save your people. I beg you, Your Majesty. With all due respect, I urge you to stand up for Samojaja and peace with the foxes. We understand your desire for peace and quiet, dear Amarok, she said, but we are not the sole bearers of arms. The Aramarans would also have to agree. They have our signal. Never. Shouted Adamak suddenly, jumping up in a flash. We would never go with those violators. A bang followed and the Aramaran flew back into his chair. Now sitting back in here, he looked stunned and terrified as Chenerah scowled at him and commanded in a quivering, aggressive voice, I said shut your mouth. It impressed the wolf male that this shepherd could actually stand up to the fox dictator and thus silence him. Gajaze had kicked the despot's leg off, because after all he had admonished him before, and this was now Amarok's moment to speak, not his. Otamak, the wolf said, Joliad has already told me about you. Nobody can blame you for being pissed off. But isn't it enough? Can't you take Chenerah up on her offer and finally act like an adult? Just do it. That way you'll protect your people and everything will be fine. What's your problem with that? You know what Banado did? You know he was a wolf? Hissed the fox. So, do you think Banado is the progenitor of all wolves? Or maybe you also think about the fact that he is the progenitor of your people? Arya, by the way, is also a she-wolf, as I'm sure you've learned. I don't give a damn about that religious interpretation. Oh, if this is what your Arya hears, that the leader of the Arameria Empire disowns her. So what? Shouted the fox dictator. This babbling about who fucked who here. I don't care. The fact is that Banato, a wolf, killed Aram, just as you, a wolf, killed my father. This is proven and has nothing to do with this stupid religion. The stuff about it is legend. We are descended from Aram and his vixen and have nothing to do with this pack. Nothing at all. The queen gritted her teeth. Insult our people and their faith just once more, Otamak Carteron, and we will have you riddled with bullets and before that have your rod torn out alive. Promptly, they both jumped up, faced each other threateningly, and snarled, showing each other their fangs. Stop! Shouted Gajaze and raised his hand, whereupon everything stopped as if by magic, became silent and time froze. The President of the United States just held his forehead thoughtfully and looked with a dogged expression. Chenerah and her opponent stood motionless, staring at each other, ready for a fight. Chenerah was the only one present who could move and slowly walked around the table towards Amarok, who at this moment had opened his muzzle and was also about to stand up. The dog grabbed the wolf's shoulder, whereupon time began to run again for him as well. No! Shouted Amarok and stood up, because that was what he was about to do before time stopped. When no one moved in response, and everything seemed frozen and motionless, he asked in confusion, "What's going on?" "Very well done, Amarok," spoke the Alsatian, and the other male apparently did not know what he meant. "Chenerah, how did you do that? What happened? Why aren't they moving?" "I explained to you that I am the maker of this story. I am telling it. Then why shouldn't I be able to pause the narration whenever I please?" "This is completely," the wolf stammered. "Impossible?" The elder added, explaining, "But as you can see, it works. Another reason to finally believe me." "Believe you?" His counterpart asked only angrily, for he had not forgotten that this shepherd had abandoned him, sneaking out of his apartment in the night. "Why should I believe you, you coward?" With a serious look, the Alsatian looked at the wolf and noticed that it looked stronger than before. "You have done well. I'm proud that," he began, but was interrupted by the other's cursing. "Proud? Fuck you, dog. Do you know what you did to my pride back then? You kicked it. Just when I was taking new courage, wanting to be with you, you stealthily fucked off. And I'll never forget it, you cowardly pig." The Alsatian recognized anger in the eyes of his friend and nevertheless went to him to be able to face him very closely. Prudently and calmly, he made him an offer. "Well, hit me if it makes you feel better. I can still tell you all this afterwards." Bam! A dull blow with the fist in the middle of the dog's lips followed, after which the Kesar staggered back a step and held his split lip, from which blood immediately dripped. "Ah!" he exclaimed, looking back at his opponent. Amarok shook his hand with a pained look and continued cursing, "You filthy mutt. I swore I'd kill you if I ever met you again. 6 years, Chenerah. Amarok, please hear me out. If it helps you, hit me again. After that, though, let's talk first before you do something stupid." The dog demanded, facing Amarok again. "You're lucky," he said, "that I don't know anything about a real beating. Otherwise I wouldn't have hurt myself, and I'd lash out a second time, I swear. Get going before the feeling returns to my fingers." I had woken up from the coma. I mean, the human on Gaja that I showed you. He woke up. "So, do you think I care about this one?" I told you that I can enter this world only when that is, my real self, is in a coma. And I woke up from that. I don't believe you. The wolf spoke angrily and clenched his fists, for he was ready to strike again. But it is so, Amarok, affirmed the other, to which he received a shake of the head in incredulity. On Gaja, only a few days had passed when I found the opportunity to come back here. I simply wrote myself into my book along with it. I mean, as an Alsatian. It took me a long time, but then with the help of meditation I learned to control my dreams. The possibility of meeting you even without being in a coma was completely new to me. Also that I can be here. Still the Samoyeden did not want to believe this dog and asked ironically, "Oh yes, a few days on Gaja. Good for you. And so you spent the rest of the 6 years writing, huh?" "Well, sure. Great story, Gajaze, very great. So that's your excuse for leaving me?" What was Chenerah supposed to say now to make the wolf believe him? Didn't he realize that there was enough evidence for the truth? Time passes differently on Gaja than it does here. I've only been back here a few days, and the first thing I did was to make sure your apartment was back in order. That's the truth, Amarok. You have my word. He swore. Your word. The younger man waved it off, annoyed. You'd better come up with something better than that, or I'll smack you, like I said. Oh, damn! Exclaimed the Alsatian, then quickly pulled the other to him and forced a wild and long kiss from him. At the beginning, the one thus assaulted tried to fight back, but the Kisar had opened its eyes, as had he, and when he could see deep into them, his body refused to fight back. He let the tension subside and showed elsewhere that this constraint, intended to impress rather than to make him aggressive, did not miss its effect. By the gods! Those eyes! Amarok thought for a moment, and when Gajaze ended the kiss and said he was sorry, he sighed. Please believe me, my wolf, the dog pleaded as their foreheads leaned against each other. Where are your omnipotence, sovereignty and arrogance now, Chenerah? The Samoyeden wanted to know. Weren't you the one who is so sure of himself that he imagines he can direct the destinies of the world? Where is this strong male? I hear you begging, pleading, and I see you caving in. Which is the real you? Gajaze thought about it for a moment and realized that what his friend was saying was true. When he met him, everything was different and all his actions no longer corresponded to those of a dominant, clever creator, an architect of entire nations. Rather, he resembled a vulnerable, tender puppy dog looking for love and attention. He never expected to fall in love with one of his protagonists and was not prepared for it. But this young wolf had done it to him, and so he could not help but show his second self, the sensitive, soft, amorous dog that he was also. The situation allowed it. I'm not as strong and brave as I seem, he spoke sheepishly, his knees shaking. Amarok, noticing this, whispered soothingly, I know, Chenerah. I'm not either. Only if we stick together can we make it. He gave him a gentle kiss on the lips and smiled before looking at the faces of the motionless people in the room and realizing that they reminded him of stiff, will-less dolls that could do nothing on their own, had to be directed, guided. They had no mind, no personality, and knew only the same program in their heads, which repeated itself, like the history of time in general. You and your eyes. Not that you think they have any influence on me. I believe you, Chenerah. Everything, I mean. Actually, all the time I have, he said, walking over to Adamak Carteron and looking at him. What are we going to do about this deluded idiot? He and Serena. Are they going to be at each other's throats? The Alsatian was glad that his friend was now favorable to him and that this enmity had finally ceased by clarifying the circumstances. Now, he said, we must know how to prevent this. Looks like you weren't very successful with your speech. The wolf nodded thoughtfully, maybe not, but now that they're oblivious, can we change their positions in the room? No. I couldn't wake her up like I did you. That only worked because you and I share a mind. I can only intervene in the events of this story through you, or at the moment I write it. And everything is already written. All this has very narrow limits, do you understand? Joliad was able to change something, and today I know that you can too. For sure. So I have to come up with something. Exactly. Do you have any ideas? The younger one asked as he looked at his queen and gently put his hand to her raised lips. They're facing each other at this table. How about you sit on its top, right between them, and I'll keep time ticking? Will that be enough? Sure, confirmed Chenerah. You're going to be pretty confused. After all, you're just sitting there from one second to the next. It'll seem to them like it couldn't possibly be, which is true. The confusion should be enough to distract them from what they want to do. And what about the Gajan? He just stares around anyway and thinks about what he should answer to your announcements. Of course, he can't think of anything to say now, because after all, on his planet, others almost always do the thinking for him and the so-called leaders of the world. He's not dangerous and doesn't bother us, for now. I wonder what will happen after that, the wolf said, and only received the answer that you can't know and just have to try it. After his nod of approval, Amarok sat down on the table between the enemies, looked to his canine companion, who had now settled back into his chair, and sighed, I'd be ready. I hope it works out. Go on, shouted the Alsatian, whereupon time resumed its normal course. The wolf soldiers quickly held out their weapons and surrounded Amarok and their queen. They were all tense and audibly breathing heavily. No one knew what to expect in this room. Perhaps there were hidden traps or Aramarans hiding and seeking shelter. They looked at the wall of a corridor leading to the left and to the right and went downstairs through the door. Lights were turned on, and with a wave of his hand, one of the gunmen silently ordered his men to continue with half of the troop to the left, while the other, together with Amarok and his mistress, walked around to the right. The round-shaped walls reminded Amarok of the tunnels of express trains, except that here they had no induction tracks on the floor and their walls were paneled. Their sober shape bore no ornamentation or pictures, and so they would not be part of a living complex, but rather connected utilitarian rooms. At the end of the corridor was another door, which opened automatically to reveal an illuminated room. The jingling of soldiers' equipment intersected with breathing sounds, and the young wolf gulped. A large room revealed itself to the visitors, in which many metal tables stood, on which test tubes and medical apparatus were placed. Tubes filled with colorful liquids protruded from large aluminum barrels, and displays shone on the pure white walls, constantly filling with data. When she realized there was no soul here, Serena asked quietly, What is this place? Amarok slowly shook his head, I don't know, Your Majesty, but I suspect it is a laboratory. It is not an infirmary, for there are no beds. What a strange complex, and underground to boot. All right. Spread out. Amarok stays with us, the queen ordered her soldiers. They quickly ran off in all possible directions, leaving Amarok and his mistress behind, whereupon the two went to a table in front of which chairs were placed. It was set differently from the others, on it lay some thick books and piles of notes. Perhaps there is some information in here, Your Majesty, the young wolf said and sat down, which Serena did as well. She picked up one of the books and read its title, written in Latin letters, Homer, the Iliad and the Story of Troy. On others were Agamemnon, Lord of Mycenae, Cleopatra and others that could be located in the Greek and Egyptian mythology of Gaja. What is all this stuff here? Where did the Aramarans get this stuff? And isn't Agamemnon the name of their spaceship? She wanted to know, but her companion only silently read a letter he had found. It was signed and sealed by Radovan Carteron. It was about a so-called deportation decree, according to which unfit for service and weak, restricted and apostate were to be taken to a camp in the west of Aramaria to build parts for a spaceship. Immediately the male realized that it must be a labor camp, and he remembered that he had once asked his friend Joliard where the latter's less clever and strong compatriots were, or whether it was the case that they were all equally clever and perfect. However, Gajaze could not answer him this question and knew nothing about this decree. His friend would have liked to show him this piece of paper now, so that he, too, would have seen what kind of leader Radovan really was. Maybe this guy here can give you answers, my queen, a voice rang out, causing the readers to startle and turn around. A soldier stood in front of them with his rifle pointed at a small robot standing on rollers, whose supposed eyes were represented by a multitude of small, glowing lights. Currently, he seemed to be cheerful, because the lights formed an upwardly curved semicircle per eye, appeared friendly and happy. What, by the gods, is that? Asked Amarok. It has the number 7 on its back, sir, and it talks and doesn't appear to be a threat. It has no weapons and appears intact. A robot? The regent asked, after which she and her subject looked questioningly into each other's eyes. But the soldier only said, It seems so. Apparently it has artificial intelligence and even answers all questions politely. The other two wolves stood up and watched the strange device, which always followed their gaze with a slight movement of the artificial head, and finally spoke in a synthetic voice, "Hello, sir." "Hello, Your Majesty." "How do you know?" stammered the addressed. "Unfortunately, there are connection problems at the moment, which is why my record hasn't been updated for a few weeks, but you should be the Wolf Queen. Serena of Samojaja, right? That's what my facial recognition showed." Majestically, the regent held out her hand to the robot as if expecting him to kiss it. However, his eyes turned into question mark symbols and Amarok chuckled. After clearing his throat, he explained, "Your Majesty, this is a robot. Surely he will know about courtly etiquette, but do you expect him to caress your hand? He doesn't even have lips." Embarrassed, she lowered her arm and agreed, "Oh. Of course. Then that's something else." The young wolf leaned toward the android and smiled slightly as its eyes changed back to the friendly half circles. "What do they call you, little one?" "I'm 7, nice to meet you." "What do they call you?" "You know who Serena is, but you don't know who I am?" "Only the great personalities of Alpha Vol are known to me. Celebrities, politicians. In my database you can find information about almost all rulers of all nations of the last 2 millennia, the machine explained, nodding. "I see," the male said and gave his name. "Hello, Amarok. How can I help you? What information do you have exactly? What is your function here?" Curious, Amarok stroked the android's artificial shoulder and it vibrated slightly as its eyes additionally displayed hearts. "Funny guy." The young wolf gloated and stood up straight again. "I know everything that can be found in the databases of the leader's headquarters," the machine promised. Serena eyed the apparatus and braced her hands on her hips. Then explained to the faithful Amarok what this device is all about and what all this apparatus is for. She spoke commandingly. The white robot explained, "This is an underground laboratory. The equipment is used to research various materials and elements. Here you can do space research and collect planetary data. Also, many Gajan books can be found here, genetic experiments can be done, and... oh yeah, drinks are right over there at the vending machine." "What? Wait a minute. Gene experiments?" the male asked, confused. "What kind of experiments and on whom? Who built this station and when?" When Chenerah gave the command, the two opponents looked stunned and President Johnson also looked puzzled. "Amarok," shouted the queen, "where have you suddenly come from?" Adamok held his breath, too, but the male wolf only explained that he would feel better if they all sat together again like rational beings instead of acting like wild animals. Serena slowly lowered herself onto the chair and the fox also followed the invitation. "That's better," the wolf praised and sat down as well. "What just happened there, Amarok?" the earthling asked, but Kesar forestalled an answer by saying that they should now continue talking about the terms for dividing Arimaria between the wolfish and the foxish sides. "Splitting up? You mean dismemberment, a mutilation, don't you, dog?" the dictator's son hissed, clasping his hands. "I can't let that happen. Don't you all realize here that I have a damn name to lose, too?" A thoughtful pause arose. "Let's not kid ourselves, dear Lord Carteron," Johnson then spoke. "Your land is half overrun, and the wolves are just waiting for an end to negotiations so they can take the rest of Arimaria as well. Our people, of course, continue to stand by their Samoyeden friends as discussed." "Friends," the fox waved, "you don't have any. You take them out, that's all. It would be better for all Anthros if you would just run away again." Then he stood up, opened one of the windows, whereupon now invectives of the demonstrators entered the building, and demanded, "Listen to them. All of you. Then you will know that I am right." Amarok nodded silently and for once had to agree with him. He remembered that it was certainly true that humans were a common problem. "Your peoples both benefit from what we have brought from Earth in return, and we of course benefit from your mineral resources. It's a win-win situation," the human man said, earning a silent nod from the Wolf Queen, while the Kesar sighed. The human alien grinned slyly and Amarok would have liked to slap him for this saying. However, if the wolf took into account everything he knew today, he had to realize that this man was right. Nevertheless, that did not mean to him that the humans had acquired any claim to anything on Alpha Vol. "Negotiations with you Gajans have been difficult all along," the shepherd said thoughtfully, and it's really beginning to annoy me. The leaders of your planet's nations are unable to reach a consensus to solve the most important problems of their own world. So now you Americans are trying to get your heads out of the noose by taking advantage of us Anthros. Excuse me? Spoke Johnson piqued. I'm charged with negotiating a good solution for everyone. You're acting like I'm only concerned about the United States. It seems more like no other Gajan people have any say in this. Why do we see mostly US Army people here, not members of your so-called UN forces? Where is the United Nations, then? The dog spoke, and Amarok understood that he could ask these questions, since he himself was, in a sense, from Gaja. The wolf crossed his arms, eager to hear the answer, but the president just bit his lower lip wordlessly and tapped his finger thoughtfully on the tabletop. I will tell you, Chenerah elaborated, how it is, the Western nations, the vassals of the United States, don't have the guts to stand up to them. Really? I really must beg, Mr. Gajaze. The Earthling admonished, but Kesar knew exactly what to say and Amarok had the feeling he was about to put a damper on human arrogance. So the Alsatian spoke passionately further, you do here exactly with us what you have always done with the states on Earth, you run in everywhere with your weapons, try to spread your so-called democratic basic order. In doing so, you cause chaos, instability and war. That's good for you, because it always leads to increased sales of resources, isn't it? And then when you've destroyed the supposed enemy, you go around rebuilding everything, at a profit for US corporations involved, of course. That's enough. The human intervened and jumped up from his chair. Chenerah, however, could not be dissuaded from adding a final word, now stood up as well and looked grimly, the stupid people are then grateful for your construction help and crawl after you, just as planned, right? Because, whose bread I eat, his song I sing, they say in Gaja. But you will not experience that here. We are not so hostile to each other. We are not so stupid as to recognize your true face. Now Amarok was very impressed. Chenerah had communicated with a few sentences that the humans were no longer wanted here and also that he had confidence in the leaders of the nations of Alpha Vol, relying on their common sense to prevail. We will no longer negotiate with you, Mr. Gajaze. It's over and done with. If you don't know how to proceed diplomatically, you don't have the right to speak to any diplomat. The American said angrily and briskly reached for his jacket, which was hanging over the back of the chair. Then the Anthros will negotiate alone first, and perhaps the Gajans will join them in due course, the Wolf Queen said sternly, and even Atamok nodded, giving Amarok a joyful smile. That was consensus. In this moment the wolf male felt that there was a quiet hope, for there was apparently agreement across borders on one thing, the human being was more obstructive than beneficial and one had to try to reach an agreement without these troublemakers. They constantly boycotted, wanted to get more and more for themselves. It was not about Alpha Vol, not about the Anthros. They wanted to create a climate in which they could expand and people would worship them willingly and gratefully. When the president had left the room, Amarok sat relaxed in his chair and listened to what they had to say to each other. There was talk of changes in which the Aramaran regime also wanted to participate. Atamok Carteron made some concessions, which pleased Serena. Constantly nodding in surrender, he had acknowledged that humans were a thorn in Alpha Vol's flesh. The hostile Canid races had to find a way to end pain and suffering. The wolfish monarch had an idea how this should work. We don't ask much from you, Lord Carteron. You should make your country what it always wanted to be and end autocracy. What do you mean? Asked the fox incomprehensibly. Go and speak to your people. Tell them that the rule of the Carteron family is over once and for all. Then we solemnly swear to you that from now on the war will be over. Let Amarok and the Kesar be witnesses to this promise. The young leader gritted his teeth and grumbled, Are you serious? You want me to declare a republic? Here, today? From the balcony of this building? Well, Lord Carteron, sighed Serena, that's not enough. It's a little too declaratory. We'd rather have something more constitutive. What do you mean by that? Chenerah grabbed his forehead after this question from the ignorant man and spoke softly, She means a constitution, you idiot. Quickly, the despot opened his muzzle and prepared to spout off, when Amarok quickly jumped up and threw his infocom on the tabletop in front of him, declaring, Look at how far your resources have been used up, how many foxes this fight has already taken. Don't you want to end this shit already? If you don't want to trust the words of the rest of us, I'm sure you'll do better with numbers. At first, The dictator looked at the device in disbelief. However, the more he tapped on it, the more fixed his gaze became. At one point he just shook his head, and you could tell he was swallowing. Before his eyes were the figures for the deportees and outcasts his father had once ordered to be taken away by decree to do forced labor in West Arimaria. They were values that proved that several hundred workers had given their lives in the construction of the spaceship Agamemnon, pointlessly, because there were technologies that could have taken over the work. After another swallow, the leader cleared his throat and spoke in a low voice, "I didn't know that this spaceship was built that way. My father wanted to use it as a weapon against the Samoyedans and then use it to leave this planet. I didn't realize that he sacrificed all those lives senselessly to do that." Chenerah looked thoughtful and Serena was silent, with her always confident look. Amarok sensed that this certainty was very close to his opponent and looked surprised when the latter slowly got up and went to the door. The others quickly followed him down the hall until they were in front of a large glass door that led to a balcony. Slogans, whistles and shouts came through from outside, not allowing for a quiet moment. The crowd was upset, but their protest was orderly. It was loud and determined, demanding and unyielding. Josiah stood in the middle of the anthro crowd and bit his tongue joyfully. This, he thought, should be the sign. If he fired now, there would be an outcry from the masses, as he had long dreamed. The dog and the two wolves stopped a few steps behind Atamok and watched as he opened the balcony door and stepped onto the ledge. He propped his hands on the wall and it took a moment for the crowd to slowly calm down. He then raised his arms, which many of those involved in the protest watched with anticipation. What was he going to do now? What would he say? "My dear friends," he began and took off for a speech. Many whistles sounded, threatening to choke his voice, but the ruler spoke unflinchingly. "Queen Serena, the Kesar and I have had final talks and have reached a solution to all the current problems. The war between Arimaria and Samojija must end. And it will end. Today, now." Not everyone in the crowd believed these words and boos were to show this to the speaker. "But this," he answered, "I know that many foxes think I am a bad leader. And wolves hate me anyway. The dogs don't care about me and people think I'm a weakling." "Yes, you are. Get the fuck out of here," shouted a voice from the crowd and was rewarded with loud laughter. "I will also say but one thing," Atamok continued. "I will now make a bold decision. Amarok, the wolf, has opened my eyes and I am very, very grateful to him." "Did I?" asked the praised one in the background. "Yes, you did, as intended. I knew you could do it," Gajaze confirmed, pleased. "I now know about my father's crimes. And I want to apologize to all of you for them." Suddenly the crowd became very quiet. "I know that I can't make up for these actions with anything. Nevertheless, I want you all to know that I regret what happened. My father brought shame to our people and was therefore destroyed by Amarok. I forgive him for his murder." When he had spoken this sentence, he turned his head back and nodded to the young wolf. It almost looked as if he was bowing respectfully before turning back to the people. "The following will be my last decision as leader of Arimaria, for after it I will immediately resign informally." Amarok could not believe it, Atamok Carteron was going to resign. He knew that this would mean the end of the war if the queen kept her promise. "I commission a delegation selected by Queen Serena to draft a constitution for the nation of Arimaria, and I repeal the laws of my predecessor and father at that time, all of them. Until there is a new government legitimized by the people, the Samojija authorities shall take over my official duties." Suddenly, a few foxes started clapping, which was followed by more and more anthros, the clapping quickly turning into thunderous noise. Many joyfully exclaimed that the war was now over, some whistled. The fox tried hard not to get lost in all the noise and continued to speak. He said that the nation of Arimaria was now a republic and that he wished the entire nation all the happiness in the world, peace and tranquility. These were things that they deserved after all these years. His speech was almost choked and Atamok realized that there would be no point in speaking against the reeling of the people, so he just lowered his head and a tear fell on the stone balcony. Even a strong, great leader, the ruler of a great nation, had to be able to cry and withdraw. He was beaten. His pride broken. Forfeited its existence. Amarok, Kesar and Serena also clapped now and the young wolf threw his arms in the air. "Yes. Yes. Done. The war is over. It's over." He shouted again and again, then suddenly stopped and thought to himself, "At least now you didn't die in vain, my little vixen. I wish you were with me now." The anthros who had gathered rejoiced, reeled and lay in each other's arms. Foxes and wolves were now to walk a common path and a promising future could begin. Carteron was still standing on the balcony. He was bent over, letting the shouts of victory wash over him. It was time to admit to himself that the war on the part of the Aramarans was lost. He had surrendered and his foxes were pleased. That was what they wanted. He had understood it now, at the latest, when he could experience their behavior firsthand. As a leader, Otomak had to take into account the wishes of his countrymen. It was they who wanted peace. So if that peace meant admitting defeat and letting the wolves occupy Aramaria, then so be it. Disappointed by his father's actions, Otomak no longer wanted to follow in his footsteps and immediately gave up. Chenerah grabbed Amarok's shoulder and noted, "We don't know where you got those numbers, dear Amarok, but they seem to have been part of a good move on your part." "Getting the numbers? That was quite easy, Your Majesty. After all, the truth is available to everyone and always." "That may be, Amarok. How did you know the despot would react that way?" she asked curiously. "Well, I didn't know. I just let myself be surprised by what the story had in store." "Didn't you, Chenerah?" Amarok winked at his friend and he nodded with a smile. Suddenly, a loud bang sounded from outside. Someone fired a gun from the crowd towards the balcony. A first and second shot missed Otomak. But before he could react, just as he was about to duck, a third bullet hit him in the chest and he instantly collapsed. Hysteria quickly spread through the crowd and many anthros screamed, running wildly. Chaos broke out and it was not clear who had shot and why. Otomak fell to the ground and Amarok rushed at him protectively. "Otomak! No!" he screamed, holding the son of Radovan in his arms. Chenerah and Chenerah had also thrown themselves on the ground and the shepherd was now crawling to his wolf. "Amarok! Are you all right?" he asked. But before his crony could answer, more bullets turned the panes of the door into splinters that flew into the hallway, inflicting cuts on the faces of those present. Amarok fell to the ground and felt a sharp pain in his abdomen. Lying on the ground, he looked down at himself and realized that a bullet must have hit him, because blood was running out of his clothes and staining them red. The firing became louder, because now security forces had also made use of their weapons. The situation was confusing and under great stress guards tried to keep the anthros in front of the building in check. For a moment, the world was a thin slice of glass being reassembled. Their scars had just closed again, when a single bullet destroyed everything and turned it back into the splinters from which it was supposed to emerge anew.